In 1985, the artist Alexander created the largest hologram in the world. 3 years later, he produced the first holographic art movie. Today, his work includes a unique collection of holographic installations. In this program from the series The Art and the Man, we shall look at the enormous creative energy that has enabled Alexander to push back scientific frontiers in the interests of art. In addition to his holographic work, Alexander has established an international reputation over the past 40 years in the more traditional art forms of painting and sculpture. Indeed, his monumental Great Tower in his native England stands today as one of the largest bronze works of modern times. The move into holosculpture came almost by accident, as a direct result of his work in what he describes as the fourth dimension.
I was creating works which I call four-dimensional sculptures, and to see these sculptures you had to either walk around them or they had to rotate, because when you did that you saw this additional dimension, this image of a form that appeared to be in the sculpture didn't really exist. And I had to find a way of conveying those to museums and galleries. And that meant that either I had to make a videotape or I had to use holograms, because those are the only two ways that you can get movement parallax. I chose holography because it's something that I hadn't done, and I was lucky to get a fellowship to work with a brilliant scientist in Australia, Dr. Harry Haran. And so then I started to make holograms, the first one or two, with the idea of developing this simply as a recording medium of my sculptures. As soon as I started making them, I had this feeling that holography could be developed as an art medium in its own right. So after the first one or two, I started then making new sculptures specifically for the holographic process. I wanted to be able to contain a human figure, and human figures don't come in small sizes, so I had to develop the process at that time. I had to push the process so that we could make holograms over 6 feet wide, so that we could fit a figure comfortably into the space without it going off the edges at either side. And I made a number of holograms then, figurative holograms, which followed the kind of figurative painting that I had been doing, and exploring the kind of imagery that came best then. And then after a while I left that phase and started making the holographic installations, which I'm doing now, which I feel are more important in the core of my work. These holographic installations are not just holographic images, they include sound, they include other environmental aspects, so that each one becomes a mini environment of its own. I wanted to be able to make the images exist out in your space, come right out into your space. The earthquake, for example, comes out 20 feet from the hologram plane. And in some of the others, the imagery comes out 10 feet, 14 feet, 20 feet, so that it's actually invading your space. It's making you become involved in it. And we had to do quite a bit of development to be able to get the image out like that.
When Alexander decided to combine holography with motion picture, he produced a new art form with the first 2 holographic movies in the world. His achievement was recognized at the Milan Art Film Festival with the special prize for advanced filmmaking.
I developed a hybrid process. It's a hybrid of a couple of hybrids. It's rather complicated, and but it does enable me to make a motion picture in which the action is taking place in 3 dimensions, and you don't need to wear glasses, and you do get motion parallax. You can look round things, you see. This is quite different, of course, to the 3D movies that you go to, because you do have to wear glasses there. You don't get movement parallax, and whether you sit on the left-hand side of the cinema or the right-hand side of the cinema, you actually see exactly the same view. Whereas in the theatre, of course, if you're on the left, you can see what they're doing behind the wings on the right, and so on. So this process does work. I've made 2 motion pictures so far, Masks, which lasts for 4 minutes, and The Dream, which lasts for 8 minutes. They are in somewhat limited format, and when I make other motion pictures in future, I will be again expanding the format and making them rather differently. One of the principal things I want to do is make them bigger. The other thing is that I want the imagery to come out into your space. So you will be looking at the action taking place in a cube in the thin air in front of you.
Holographic works feature prominently in Alexander's retrospective exhibition of the 80s, which is currently in great demand.
That's been shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sao Paulo in Brazil. It was shown at the Museum of Fine Arts of Chile in Santiago, and it is now, while this piece is being made, it's now in the Modern Museum of Art in Southern California, and it's going on to tour other art museums during this year and to the end of '91.
Much of Alexander's approach to holography is echoed in his new style of painting, which reaches out to the viewer with a similar 3-dimensional effect.
I think the main trigger was the Horrors of War piece. I saw in my mind this soldier floating in space with his gun pointing towards the viewer. And that told me that if it was going to really work and really be effective, it had to exist in the viewer's space. It had to be there, floating in the air in front of the viewer. That seemed to me a very important part of that image. Now, prior to that, most of the holograms that have been made only came out from the hologram plane about 18 inches. To make this piece, The Horrors of War, the front of the gun actually projects out of the hologram plane 9 feet towards the viewer. So it really does occupy that same space. And in my mind, it wouldn't have been possible to make that work at all, never mind for it to be effective, if I wasn't able to bring it out in space like that. And it's actually since making The Horrors of War that I have been preoccupied, both in the holographic installations and in the paintings, of reaching out, of invading the space of the viewer, of really getting as close as possible, and by that means communicating more effectively.
The desire to communicate with people through his art and to influence their behavior is a strong motivating force for Alexander, and he believes that holography and his new style of painting have that kind of power.
They communicate very strongly indeed. Just to give you a couple of examples, one dear lady that viewed the figure of Christ leaving the cross coming towards her broke down and cried in front of it and said she'd never been so emotionally moved in all her life. And I understand that. I mean, I think that is the way it should be. And I was showing an art professor the car crash, and he said, you know, the difference between this and the things that we're used to in art, of seeing paintings of a car crash. We see those things, but we just look at them, and we look at them as visual images. We don't, they don't touch us. But this car crash, you are emotionally involved in it. You're emotionally involved in the shock, the terror.
Shock, terror, and the horrors of war. Alexander sets out to involve the viewer and to stir the conscience with the power of his art. painter, sculptor, holographer. Alexander is a man of many art forms. A truly international artist, he was born in England and operates from studios in America and Australia. His work across a wide range of art media has spanned 40 years and has won recognition worldwide. In this program from the series The Art and the Man, we are going to concentrate on his painting and see how his work in other media has led to a new and exciting art form.
I'm actually painting these pictures at the same time that I'm making holographic installations. And I'm using the same attitude, the same perspective, the same series of concepts in these paintings that I'm using in the installations. And of course that makes them very different because nobody else happens to be making holographic installations like that and doing paintings. And so I don't deal with the surface of the canvas as holding the imagery and creating the illusion of whatever kind of space that I want to have. But the canvas is in fact an anchor plane, and what I look at is the whole of the space from the viewer's eyes to behind the canvas, behind that anchor plane. And that's why these paintings, many of them, come right out towards the viewer 3 or 4 feet or a meter, however you like to express it, and the space contains objects which is the way that one would approach making a holographic installation. That is that sort of cone of vision from your eyes right through to behind the hologram. So I'm adopting exactly the same approach whether I'm making holographic installations or these paintings.
Alexander nurses a passionate belief that art can be used to influence and indeed change human behavior. Many of his works reflect his abhorrence of violence and his belief that the power of God can transcend man's inhumanity towards man. As a result, the symbols of the cross and barbed wire are often present in his work.
One of the works that I did, I suppose about 1983, I produced a work called War and Peace 2. In that I took a ball of barbed wire and I carved into it the shape of a cross, a crucifix. And then that sculpture, which is part of my retrospective exhibition now, and the hologram that's made from it, that gives me 2 works which embody 2 extremes of the human condition. The barbed wire symbolizes the worst of mankind's behavior, the very worst things that people can do to each other. So the concentration camps, the Holocaust, and so on. And the cross symbolizes the possibility that man has of transcending this material world, and the possibility that there is something spiritual there, something beautiful, something that is really very much more important. And actually, when I made that work, I didn't realize then the importance of those 2 pieces of symbolism and the fact that they were both in the same work. But as my philosophy has developed in recent times, this that was foreshadowed in that work has become really very important. The barbed wire I use a lot is a symbol, and I can use that symbol in various ways. I've created a series of paintings called The Escape of the Souls, and the barbed wire is very obviously a constraining fence all the way round, and you see how the souls are able to escape from that prison, as it were. But I've also used it in other ways where I try and take this symbol of the ultimate nastiness and turn it into something completely different, changing the context, as it were. Now the cross, when we come to the symbol of the cross, that is something different. There I face a problem. As I said previously, my religious idea is one of a single God that is in every one of us in the world. And the cross symbolizes the one religion of Christianity. The reason I use the cross a lot is because there isn't a universal symbol that represents a God for everybody. Therefore, I couldn't get across this concept of religiousness, if you like, or spiritual nature, except by using a religious symbol that people are aware of. And in fact, what I do, I use the cross, I use the Star of David, I use the symbols of various other religions, such as the Buddhist symbols. And in one work that I am planning to do for an important work in the near future, it is my intention to include in that work every single symbol of every religion that we know about. And all this is because we haven't yet got a symbol for a religion that everybody would find acceptable: Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Tamils, and so on.
The environment, too, is an issue about which the artist Alexander cares, along with many other people, as we enter the 90s. The difference is that he feels strongly that he can cause people to do something by communicating the urgency through his art.
Both the holographic installations that I'm making and the paintings, whatever else might be said about them, do communicate very, very strongly. In front of one of my works during the last year, one of the visitors actually broke down and cried her eyes out and said she'd never been more emotionally moved in her life. And many people have spoken about the emotional response to the works that I'm doing. It's really not that I believe that many people don't care about the environment. It is that although they care, they need their cares reinforcing, they need their cares crystallizing so that they will do more about it. They'll do more to try and get things done politically. They'll do more in their own lives to do things which are more environmentally friendly. And yes, I believe that my paintings and my holographic installations will help to just emphasize this message. It's not that they're going to get the message from me. The message is there. It exists in the world. I'm just going to help to give them a little nudge that will move us all further forward, faster forward, to be able to take care of our environment.
This new style of painting has already met with the kind of enthusiastic response that has been the hallmark of Alexander's work over the years.
There's an exhibition of the paintings which are additional to the retrospective exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in Southern California. I've just had an exhibition of these paintings in the Holsworth Gallery in Sydney, and I've just had another exhibition of these paintings in the Ultima Gallery in Los Angeles. And there are a lot of other exhibitions planned.
And so the crusade continues. A crusade by an artist who believes that man can lead a richer and fuller life, and that his art can help him find the way.